we're working toward a just transition, which really is a transition away from this extractive economy and toward a living economy, right? And the way that we do that, so the extractive economy is built on this kind of combination of resources that are extraction, dig, burn, dump. We combine it with work and with exploitation, and all for the purpose of enclosing wealth and power, right? And this is upheld through a combination of worldview that includes white supremacy, patriarchy, consumerism, and colonial mindset, as well as governance, which is militarism. And the premise of this whole framework is that we need to transition out of this extractive economy and towards a living economy, an economy built on caring, built on deep democracy, that uses regenerative resources, that uses cooperation, and it uses ecological and social well-being. And there's two ways that we can do this, or a number of ways we can do this, but the two that I'm going to focus on are kind of this arrow here at the top, stop the bad, build the new. These are solutions that are visionary and oppositional. This is how we do it from a culture perspective. And then down here at the bottom, divestment, investment through a values filter. This is how we change governance in this system, okay? So let us start with, I need to clear all these things. Can I clear them? I hope I can clear them. Maybe not. Oops. I'm going to stop the screen share and then we're going to start over. See, problem solved. On the fly solutions. So the first part, I'm going to talk about the stop the bad, build the new part. So there's a lot of really bad stuff that's going on in housing, and our systems are built on it, right? This is a really real world, recent example of what happens out in the real world. So this, in July, we got word that there was an apartment building in Mattapan that was being put up for sale. Is anybody in the room either live in or from or have knowledge of Mattapan? All right. Does anybody know what's Mattapan got? Why are people so interested in investing in Mattapan? Do it, Armani.
If I could share, Mike, I think one of the, I was just gentrified out of Mattapan 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. But they're really starting to build a whole new infrastructure of the T system, mm-hmm. which of course we know that when we bring those elements of transportation, then the community changes. They kind of push out the Black and brown community and bring in the Caucasian community as easier access to downtown Boston. So they're building a whole new system, a transit line up on Cummins Highway. It's just one of the elements of why Mattapan is starting to be focused on.
Yeah, you mentioned, thank you, Stacy. You mentioned who they're trying to bring to Mattapan. Who has been in Mattapan? Who's there? Go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's predominantly over the years that I've noticed is Haitian community. Mm-hmm. And so they're bringing in a lot of wealthy Caucasian people who all of a sudden we have this new parking codes and zones. And I mean, it's almost as we were never heard. I mean, we were never able to express what we may want in our community, right? And so now that white people are really buying up some of the property up there, again, I was gentrified out. I took the gentleman to court. Mm-hmm. I'm formerly incarcerated. I'm sure you'll hear my story soon, but I know about courts. And so I challenged him to take me to court. Like, you can't come in. I'm paying $1,200 a month rent, which was market rent at the time. And he bought the house and he asked for $2,100.
Wow.
Yeah, like, really, just like that.
Overnight.
Yep.
Yep, that is not an uncommon thing. Thank you for sharing that story, Stacy. And I'm really sorry that you had to go through that. Um, Mattapan, yeah, it's predominantly people of color, predominantly Black immigrants, lots of Haitian folks, although not exclusively Black immigrants. But and it's one of these communities that's undergoing a whole lot of change. A few years back, if you're unfamiliar, there was some public transit infrastructure that had gone through the neighborhood for decades with all the environmental, impacts that it had, but it never stopped in the neighborhood. And so the community rallied and said, hey, if it's going through the neighborhood, then we should have access to the stops and to the train. And so once those stops were built, a lot of investors started to move in and buy buildings there. This one example that I have on the screen, this is a building called Morton Village. It's a 207 unit building. It's a really big building for Boston. Boston doesn't have a ton of like 100+ unit buildings. This is one of them. And would somebody mind reading kind of this kind of quote that I pulled? This is a report from the Boston Globe that was published in July.
I can read it.
Please.
In Boston, these days, inexpensive apartments are scarce, whatever. So when a building full of them goes up for sale, people worry they won't stay inexpensive for long. On the one hand, it's a routine transaction, a long-time owner cashing out in a hot market. On the other, it's a potential crisis, putting 207 low-cost apartments at risk in a city that needs all the affordable housing it can get. The title, "For Sale Sign on Affordable Apartment Building in Mattapan Raises Fears Tenants Will Be Forced Out." Nonprofits, city teaming up to try to buy Morton Village, head off rising rents.
Thanks, Hermione. Yeah, so this was a really big, actually I was reading this article earlier today and I learned one of the tenants found out that this building was being sold by the UPS driver who dropped off a package. That's how he learned and, was super proactive. So in the face of this, that person reached out and started organizing. That's what they did. One of the things that I genuinely, truly believe is that the only safe community is an organized one. He started organizing. And we did a number of rallies. This is Sandra Hardy. She's a really amazing leader in that building. She says, we collectively need to save the very roof over our heads. She'd lived in that building for 25 years. She said, do not meet with them individually. We are united. They built a tenant union, a tenant association that was fighting to save their homes, all 200+ of them, and keep them affordable. Over time, this site ended up, this is a picture of some of the tenants. This was in the early days. They ended up getting all 200+ families engaged in this campaign and advocating and united. And during that sale, the city of Boston and our organizing and the Caribbean CDC locally was pushing for a sale to a nonprofit. We would have loved a land trust to come in and buy this property. And that, it requires so much money in the city of Boston to acquire, renovate, and maintain property that it was really hard to get the amount of capital that was necessary for a CDC to buy it. So a CDC, a land trust, any kind of nonprofit developer, that would have been great. That was committed to not displacing the residents. Ultimately, that sale ended up going through to a company called Avernath Capital. Avernath is a company, it's a for-profit company from what I understand, but their entire business is around maintaining affordable housing. So there was somebody who came into the neighborhood with the intention of long-term stability for residents, not, buy and flip, buy and push out, but really to try to keep people there. So this is what ended up happening. So all 200+ families started negotiating together over time. Some of them had to leave due to a variety of circumstances, but they still had well over 80% of the units represented in this agreement. A lot of back and forth. Eventually the tenants and Avernath reached an agreement that allows for 3% rent hikes over each of the next 3 years. So for context, that's about $35 to $40 per month, which is, still a rent hike. Just to be very clear, it is still unaffordable housing for many. And we also knew that for these folks, that offered significantly more stability than the alternative, which would have just privatized all of the profit and pushed people out and considered that like an externality. So when we kind of look at how do we stop the bad and build the new, this kind of tenant organizing work, land trust work, nonprofit purchase work is super important. This is going to be really quick, and then we'll kind of transition to some Q&A. The way we do our organizing work, you've already kind of seen, you've met all the different parts of it. We call it the sword, the shield, and the offer. The sword represents public pressure and protest. The reason we have those protests was because we knew that it would create some public pressure to force the sale a certain way or to get the landlord to make certain concessions. The next part of the strategy is the shield, which is legal defense. We defend these tenants in court through the end as far as we can, both for the purpose of buying them enough time, as well as to make it, if we're going to be pushed out by a landlord, we're not going to make it easy, which actually does have a material impact on whether that building becomes permanent. I'll talk about that in just a second. And the last part is the offer, winning an agreement that you need. A lot of the times this agreement takes the property out of the speculative market and puts it on something that's long-term affordable, a land trust, etc. But really we're focused on what is the agreement that the people that live there need so that they're not displaced, that they're stable, that they're healthy, and that their kids are able to continue at the same school and they're still able to vote in the same precinct that they always do. That social capital and the social community, those social connections are so important for our people. Especially in this time of isolation. This was all happening during COVID, by the way. So that's the model. There's a whole bunch of data and stuff. I don't have time to go through it all. The long story, I'm gonna stop screen sharing. The long story short is that the way that I approach a lot of this housing stuff is that the market will do its thing. The market is going to make decisions based on maximizing profit oftentimes. That's generally the logic of the market. And our goal is to transition that mindset, that mentality, that goal to something that really is meeting the needs of the people who live in the community. That is about cooperation, and that's about ecological and social well-being. So every opportunity that we're able to transition a piece of property, a building, a family, a person from that extractive economy to a regenerative economy, we're gonna push for. Resistance does have, I'll just kind of end on this last piece because I know there are some investment and finance-minded folks in the room. The last piece about this is that there is a material impact on organizing a building. So I said earlier, the only safe community, secure community is an organized one. An organized community actually, if I am trying to sell a 200 unit building and I'm trying to sell it and every single one of those units is united, it's gonna change how I approach the sale of that building and who's gonna be willing to buy it. And so there are actual material benefits to organizing in terms of transitioning property out of speculative markets and into decommodified ones. A lot of the time, we work with a lot of CDC and nonprofit kind of partners that manage housing. And property is just so damn expensive in Boston that if you buy an empty building, financially, oftentimes it doesn't make sense to buy a triple decker. And that's the majority of affordable, quote unquote, affordable housing in the city of Boston is kind of that. It's a triple decker or multifamily housing. And when a sale is forced where all the units of that building are organized, it actually lowers the value of the building for sale. So it means you can sell the building, but you're going to sell it for less than you would if it was empty. And the reason is because, the person who's buying it knows that they're going to have to spend the money to get you out. And that actually is a part of a capital stack. That's a dollar amount that if the building were empty, a CDC would have to come up with that amount of dollars. But if the tenants are united and the sale goes the way that the tenants want it to go to, that's basically free money. That's money, that's equity that the tenants themselves are bringing to the table already, by the nature of being organized and being united. So I can talk about that a ton more, but I'm not gonna, because I have overstated my lecture welcome. So we have just a few minutes for questions, and I'd love to take on any questions that folks have. I know it's a lot to sink in, sorry. I had a lot of coffee.
I think, Mike, this is Stacy again. I am a woman who works with formerly incarcerated women and some men coming back into the community from incarceration. How does this plan, how does this vision fit in with formerly incarcerated people really developing and cultivating, coming into the community and being part of, this housing? We know we have housing issues with formerly incarcerated people with their quarries. How would they be able to connect and collaborate with you on some of these? I mean, this is big. I can't imagine me coming out of prison, and even when I did come out of prison, I wouldn't have been able to process any of this. But I think that some of the work that we do, bringing people home and really getting them to see that they too can be a part of the bigger picture of what reimagining in our communities can look like.
That's right.
Especially in the housing market. So how would they be able to connect?
Yeah, so I definitely would love to schedule a time with you in addition to what I'm gonna say, but let's exchange contact info. But I would say, at the heart of this question is, what is the relationship we want to have with each other? And, to the point of like, what is, so folks who were formerly incarcerated do face a number of, so they were already at a systemic disadvantage before incarceration. And then incarceration happens, and then they get more structural disadvantage added on, more structural inequity. And a lot of it is punitive. A lot of it is, maybe well-intentioned, but I would say is based on an outdated model of what justice is and what community looks like and how we hold each other. That's really the core question for me, is like, if we had, a 207 unit building where we can govern it collectively, then, whether somebody has a quarry or not is less important to me than how are you showing up for this community and how are we holding you? You know what I mean? And so part of it is just like the market economics just don't support formerly incarcerated people. But if we transition that economy out of extraction and toward regenerative economy, then I would say that it completely changes our relationships with each other, with the land, and how we govern things. So that's what I would say. But I would love to talk with you kind of separately about that. And then I know that we're super at time, and I would love to address Ari's question. Do I have a minute to do that or no?
Yeah, 60 seconds. 60
seconds, yes. All right. I'm going to do the quickest 60-second screen share ever. This was also in my slideshow. I didn't share it, but here it is. So capital is required at a lot of different stages of transitioning property from a market-driven economy to a regenerative one, all the way from seed capital, acquisition, renovation, maintenance, right? So I was talking specifically about COHIF. COHIF and most affordable housing in the city of Boston is what's called naturally occurring affordable housing. It's kind of a it's kind of a BS term, but it means that it's relatively affordable compared to the luxury stuff that's going up that's new. So using this kind of combination of the sword and the shield, legal defense and protest and street action, it actively lowers the acquisition cost versus a building that is disorganized or empty. And the reason for that is because if somebody's buying an organized building, we always tell investors, if you buy this building, you buy resistance. And resistance is expensive. You know, you're going to have to be in court. You're going to have to kind of pursue this process. They know that we're going to defend them legally. So a lot of people just don't do it. But it actually does impact the sale price of the property. So when in the cases where the building is organized, that actually is an amount of capital that essentially the organized residents are bringing to the table that otherwise wouldn't exist, because the property is going to end up selling for less money to the right buyer, to a nonprofit, to a land trust, etc. So I would love to talk more about that. Like what does that mean and how does it look? And you know, there's a bajillion different kind of aspects of affordable housing finance that I don't think we can squeeze in. But I would love to keep that conversation going and open.
Thank you so much, Mike, for sharing with us and presenting to the group. I'm sure that you can track down Mike's contact info for any follow-up info.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat.